Hi, my name is Mrs. Horseman, and today we are going to be talking, hopefully very briefly, about the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And I'm going to introduce you to the cell. When we're talking about cells, we're talking about things that you can't see with just your eyes. You're not going to be able to see in our classroom a cell without using a microscope. Okay, and the kinds of cells that you would be able to see using the microscopes that we have access to at our school would be like plant cells and some animal cells, some prokaryotes, but even some of the prokaryotes, like the bacteria cells, are so small that even the microscopes we have wouldn't be strong enough to see the tiny, tiny, tiny cell. Okay, so let's start off talking about prokaryotes. Pro means before, okay? So we're talking about some of the very first original cells. These cells do not have a nucleus, okay? So pro means no. Think of it that way. Pro, no. Prokaryotes, no nucleus. They are single-celled organisms. They're very, very simple, which means they don't have a lot of stuff going on inside of the cell. No nucleus. They do not have a nucleus. They do have a single strand of DNA that's coiled up and kind of floating in the middle of that prokaryote cell. They design that the nucleoid region. It is not the same as a nucleus. It's just talking about where that DNA is hanging out. Okay, it's not the same. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. They don't have any other organelles that have their own membranes, and we'll talk more specifically about organelles in a different video. But just so you know, prokaryotes don't have a lot of organelles. The only organelle that they really have inside the cell is ribosomes. And ribosomes are important for the production of protein. And as we learned this year, proteins are important players in almost every function that happens in the cell. So they do have the ability to make their own proteins. They have a very strong cell wall that helps protect that prokaryote from outside changes. Okay, so we talked about maintaining internal conditions despite external changes as homeostasis. Remember that word? So the cell wall is really important for that very small, helpless prokaryote cell to maintain homeostasis. I say they're helpless, they're really not. When we talk about prokaryotes, what we're really talking about are bacteria and algae cells, okay? So there are lots of different kinds of bacteria. Some bacteria have a very good symbiotic relationship with us. We take advantage of them and they take advantage of us, and life is good. Some other ones, not so much. Some of the other bacteria are the ones that can really make you sick. Okay, and then algae is actually talking about single-celled organisms that a lot of times you'll find all grouped together. So when I think of algae, I think of like that green scum that sits on top of a pond. So those are prokaryote cells, just to give you an idea. They do have the ability, some of them, to move around, and I will show you. Actually, let's look at this picture right here. This is a cartoon picture of a cell right here, of a prokaryote cell. If you look in the middle here, there's the chromosomes, there's the DNA. There's nothing around that that's helping protect that. All right, so we're just looking at a big chunk of DNA floating in the middle of the cell. Here, this yellow part is the membrane that's wrapped around the cell, and then this darker part is the cell wall that wraps around that. And then it's got like this extra sticky coating that helps it stick to stuff. Gross. These little grayish balls are the ribosomes. And if you look up here, here's actually a real picture that was taken with a microscope of a bacteria cell. There's a couple of them right here. Okay, so here is the DNA. This is the nucleoid region. It's just a bunch of stringy DNA hanging out in the middle of that cell. Okay, nothing else, no nucleus. And then if you look at the if you look right through here, you'll see that there's a few different layers. So that would be the membrane and the cell wall, and then that sticky coating. And then all of these little things right here are called pili. All these little, they almost look like little hairs, are called pili, and they help it stick to stuff and communicate with other bacteria cells. So really, in prokaryote cells, there's just not a lot going on. Eukaryotes. U is actually looking at means true, so the prefix EU means true, so it's looking at true kernel cells, or cells that have a nucleus. These, in comparison, are much more complex, and so scientists often refer to that as a modern cell, even though cells go back to the beginning of organisms. Specifically, eukaryotes have a lot more things going on, so they call them modern. There is a nucleus in the cell. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus, so this is the way I remember it. Pro means no. Eukaryotes is like you and me. We are animal cells. We have nuclei inside of our cells. Okay, so eukaryotes are like you and me. There is a nucleus. Inside that nucleus is the DNA, and that DNA contains all of the genetic information that is going to be responsible for controlling everything that that cell does. The nucleus is surrounded by a membrane that has lots of pores or holes in it, and I'll show you in a picture in just a second, and that's going to help that information quickly move in and out of the nucleus so that our cells can respond quickly to its environment. They do have lots of membrane-bound organelles that are going to carry out specific functions, and we'll talk more about organelles in a different video, but I will point a couple of them out as we go through and look at some of the pictures. Some of the bacteria I forgot to mention are able to move with something called a flagella. Most eukaryotes don't have a flagella. It's like a really long strand that sticks out, almost looks like a tail, and it helps some bacteria move around. Eukaryotes, instead, some of them have cilia, and those cilia are little hair-like structures that help them move, okay, if they need to. Cells like our skin cells, they're not going anywhere, so they don't have any projections that help them move around. When we're talking about eukaryotes, we're talking about plants and animals and fungus. Most of the time, though, we'll refer back to plants and animals. They're going to be the two that we focus on the most this year. So here are some pictures of eukaryote cells. Here is a plant cell, and you can tell it's a plant because it has a very square shape to it, okay? They also made the outside of it green. Plant cells do not have green cell walls. They just draw them like that because it helps people quickly determine that they're plant cells. Really, the only thing that you're going to see that's colorful in a true cell is going to be the chloroplast if you're looking at a plant cell. Animal cells, on the other hand, are more circular shaped. They are not these pretty colors either. Unless we stain them with special dye, you're really not going to be able to see much color in an animal cell. The nucleus is right here in the middle, and it's going to control all of the things that are going on outside of the cell, or outside of that nucleus, inside the cell. And the same thing, here's the nucleus down here. And then all the other stuff that's crammed in there are the other organelles that we'll spend some more time talking about. All right, so quickly we're going to go through the 5 features that every single cell has, okay? A cell membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, cytoskeleton, DNA. Every single cell will have these things. So if I ask you to compare and contrast prokaryote and eukaryote cells, in the very middle of that Venn diagram should be these 5 things, and some other things possibly, but these things are going to be the thing that every single cell has in common, okay? So let's look at a cell membrane. Quickly, the cell membrane, this is the outside of the cell. This is the inside of the cell, okay? And this membrane is going to wrap all the way around it, all right? There are actually 2 layers of a cell membrane, okay? So this is the top layer, this is the bottom layer. It's made out of a phosphate head and lipid tails, all right? And the same thing on this side, lipid tails and the phosphate head. Those lipid tails, remember we talked about polar and nonpolar? Lipid molecules are nonpolar, so they do not like water. They actually, water and oil don't mix, water and fat don't mix. So that's why these tails are kind of on the inside of that membrane sandwich, because they don't want water to touch them. They're afraid of water. The outside is a polar region, so it sits well with water. There are some other things going on here. There's some carbohydrates sticking out. This is some cholesterol that's actually good. It's helping our cell membrane not fall apart. These big purple things, and we'll talk more about that in another video too, but these big purple things are proteins, and they either help communicate or they help other molecules move in and out of the cell easily, okay? The next thing that every single cell has is a cytoskeleton. You are not going to be able to see cytoskeletons when we're looking at a cell in the microscopes that we have, but this is like this big fibrous network made up of different microtubules and microfilaments and all these other things, and that actually allows, it gives structure to the cell, and it also allows things to move quickly throughout the cell itself, okay? So it makes me think of those like climbing nets that are at jungle gyms, and you have to like climb like a big spider web and you climb all over them. That's what they make me think of. But really, that's what it is. It's these big net-like structures that are throughout the whole entire cell so that the organelles can quickly move around if they need to, and information can quickly move through the cell as well. We'll talk in more detail about later, but we also said ribosomes, and don't forget ribosomes make proteins. Cytoplasm is that jelly-like stuff that's on the inside of a cell, and it just kind of holds everything in there. And this is where all the metabolic processes are going to take place, is inside that cytoplasm. And then the other thing that I said was DNA. And DNA is the genetic information that is responsible for every single thing that will happen inside of that cell. And everything that goes on in your body and makes you who you are is because of the DNA that's in your cell. So even prokaryotes have DNA, all right? So that was our crash course of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Don't forget, if you have any questions, write them down, and I will be happy to talk to you about them in class. And thank you.